in one full stack developer rather than hiring 2 or 3 engineers to do the same job. Today, we will do a quiet but deep dive into the everything you need to know about Firebase and full stack development. We can be very proud of our record. Our speaker today is well known to the UCKNs. As an alumni of the CSE department, we feel proud to welcome Mr. Arjun Srikumar, second runner-up AICT Smart India Hackathon 2K18. He is a freelance developer and former intern at International Center for Free and Open Source Software. He is a member of the SICC KU File Management Software ACA development team. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Arjun Srikumar to deliver the session. Please, Arjun.
Okay, thank you, Miss. Good evening, everyone. Let me introduce myself first. I'm Arjun Srikumar. I'm an alumni of UCK, and presently I'm about to complete my post-graduation. I'm taking information security from College of Engineering, Trivandrum. So let's get into the webinar. Okay. So coming to the webinar, while choosing the topic, I wanted to consider a few factors. The first one being, the topic should be easy to understand for you. And the second being, it should be easy enough to learn for you even without anybody's help. And for that to happen, there should be abundant, easy to understand resources available in the internet, such as video tutorials, blog tutorials, online courses, and documentations. And last point, last factor, which is the most important one, and that is, this topic should be useful to your career. So considering all these factors, I decided to introduce you to the concept of full stack development and Firebase by Google. So both of these concepts are related to application development in general. Before moving ahead, let me make myself clear that I won't be going too deep into the concept. I will stick to the basics, which is essential for you to understand before starting to learn these concepts. Okay. So the first question, of course, is what is full stack? Before understanding that, let me give you an example. Say, let's take the case of a car, okay, a motor car. And we know that a car is not made in just one piece. Okay, we know that the car is not made up of a single material. Instead, various components of that car are made separately using different materials, and then at the factory, the mechanics assemble these parts together to build the final product, right? So this is the same case with an application development as well. We are not developing the application in one single piece. Instead, we'll be dividing an application into different modules, smaller sub-modules, and these tasks will be assigned to different individuals in the team. And once they complete these modules, we often assemble them together to form the final product. So in the future, you may be joining an organization as a developer. There you may be assigned to a team which is working on an application. And obviously you won't be given the entire task of developing the application by yourself, but instead you will be given a smaller task. Okay. So even though you are given a smaller task, you still need to be aware of the entire process happening in the development phase. You need to be having a clear idea about the architecture of the application. So that's why that's where the importance of full stack concept comes. Okay. So to sum up, full stack relates to some the entire application architecture. We'll see in detail what that architecture in the upcoming slides. So this here is the typical general architecture of a application. By application, what I'm meaning is it includes web applications which are accessed through web browsers, and also it includes the mobile applications you use on your smartphones. Okay. So a typical application architecture looks like this. Okay. You can see there are 3 colored blocks in this picture. One is blue colored block, then a red colored block, and a green colored block. You can see the names there as front end, back end, and database. Okay, we'll discuss detail about these concepts in the later slides, but just to give you an overview, these three modules, you can see that front end module happens to be situated at the farther end from the database. It is kept as far as possible from the database, and this backend application is attached to the database. Okay, so in entirety, an application can be divided into three major sections called front end, backend, and database, and we'll see how these things work and what are its benefits. And also one more thing is there called API. API is a channel. It stands for Application Programming Interface. It's a channel through which the front end and back end make communication. And one more thing is there called runtime environment. I'll discuss about that later in one of the later slides. So coming to the front end, let's see what a front end application is. Okay. So you see, in a business where an application is the product, you will have an end user called the customer and a business provider or service provider. These two are the type of users involved in a business. Okay, so this front end application is used for the client. Okay, used for the interactions of the client or the end user. So it is called a client application, and it is, as we seen from the previous slide, that the front end module situates farthest from the database. This is because we know that in our current world, data is the most costliest thing. So we don't want the data to be manipulated by some strange users. Okay, so for that particular reason, we don't want to give direct access to the data to a normal end user. So this is the reason why the front end module is kept farther away from the database. Okay, and this front end actually is an interface where the user communicates in the system, interacts with the system. The user often wants to access data from the database. So what the user does is, he or she creates a request on the user interface provided to that particular user, and this request will be transferred to the backend later. So in a typical example, let's take the case of Facebook. You will be all having a Facebook account, right? So when you go on to www.facebook.com, an interface happens to load on your web browser, and in that interface you interact with the social media using your credentials, login with your credentials, and then there are different buttons and links that you can access. So this interface you are getting is your front end for Facebook application. Okay. Similarly, your Android applications are also acting as front end application. Okay. Now, as I said, it is the interface where you make CRUD requests. CRUD stands for create, read, update, and delete operations. These are the major 4 operations we carry out in a database. So since the user is not directly given the access to the database, the user will be making requests to perform these CRUD operations in their front-end interface. Okay, and content presented to the user here may vary. For example, there are millions of users in Facebook, and each of these users are accessing the front-end module of the Facebook application, but the content inside these front-end applications will be different based on their user credentials and their data, right? Now, okay, so since we understood what a front-end application is, now we need to know about the frameworks or technologies that are used in the industry to develop front-end applications. And as I said, we can divide front-end applications into 3 categories. The first one being web applications, which are accessed through web browsers. The other one being mobile applications, your typical Android applications, typical iOS applications. And there is another category, a relatively newer category called hybrid applications. We'll explain each of them in detail. So coming to web application, we want to develop a front-end application. For that, usually you can design a website using simple HTML and CSS. But when it comes to a much more interactive front-end interface, you need to use better framework. And there are a lot of popular frameworks available such as AngularJS, React.js, Vue.js, Ember.js, etc. So among this, AngularJS used to be the most popular one for many years, but recently with the advent of React.js, it has kind of overthrown AngularJS from that top position. React.js is now the most popular framework for front-end development. Vue.js is also another popular one. I will talk more detail about React.js later in this webinar. Now coming to the mobile application, a few years back, we used to develop mobile application specific for each OSs, operating system, such as Android OS, iOS, right? So if you remember correctly that a few years back, if a new app launches in the market, the Android version releases first, and then it will take a little more time to release the iOS application. The reason for this is, a few years back, the reason for this is the code written for Android platform and the code written for iOS platform were different, and also the code written for web platform was also different. So for launching an application, the app developers has to go through different development process, use different technologies for different platforms. But recently a new concept has been introduced called hybrid applications, where you just need to write one set of code and you can easily convert that code into applications that work on different platforms such as web platform, Android, iOS, etc. So due to this, it actually reduces the time for development, these hybrid applications. So due to this advantage, hybrid applications are nowadays getting more popular. Nowadays, more companies are shifting towards this hybrid application culture, and that's where the importance of React Native, Ionic, and Flutter comes. These are certain technologies, newer technologies that support hybrid application development. Among this, React Native and Flutter are currently the most popular ones. So if you can add at least one of these technologies, either React Native or Flutter, to your skill set, it will be a great addition to your career, because a lot of companies are currently looking for people who can work in hybrid applications. So coming to the next slide, now we are moving to backend. Okay. Now let's see how backend is differed from frontend. As I said, the front-end user is not given direct access to the website. So he can only make a request, and that request should be processed by someone who is authorized to do so. And that module which processes the request from user is called the backend. And this backend application is managed by the business provider or the service provider who have the admin capabilities. It's like the administrator of the application. So this module is the closest to the database, as you can recall from the architecture diagram. And this module which is handled by the service provider, and also the interface in which the user client requests reach where they are processed before accessing the database. So once the user's request comes to the backend, it processes the request, validates it, and makes query to the database and fetches only the corresponding data and will send it to the user side. Now the backend application can also monitor activities of all users. Let's take the case of say Facebook itself. Okay, in Facebook there is a provision for you to report a post which is maybe harassing to you or which is spreading fake news. So if you report a post, immediately that post won't be removed. Instead, a request will be sent to the Facebook administration, and they will at the backend side verify your claim, and then they have the ability to remove the particular post. So that's why that's what that line means. The backend application can monitor all activities of all users They can make changes as well. They can even delete users, create users, and temporarily block users as well. And backend application is also used for broadcasting content changes to all versions of its front end. As I said, the front end version for different users will be different based on the content, and a backend application can be used to broadcast changes to all of its front end versions. Now coming to the development of backend application, these are a few famous popular frameworks used: Django, Express.js, and Laravel. Django is one of the most popular frameworks that is used for developing backend applications, and it is Python based. So if you are already good at Python, you can try out Django, and a lot of companies are also looking for Django developers. Now coming to Express.js, it is another backend service framework that is based on JavaScript. So you are comfortable with JavaScript, you can go for Express.js. The benefit of learning JavaScript in the case of application development is so huge, because if you have the basic idea of syntax and writing code in JavaScript, then it will come in handy when you learn React.js, Express.js, Node.js, etc. So I would suggest that you should learn JavaScript if you are looking to make a career in application development. And one another is Laravel, which is a framework based on PHP, and that's it. So now coming to the third module of the application development architecture, that is database. As I said, nowadays data is the most valuable thing in the world. So we need to keep our data, application data, secure, and its integrity should be maintained properly. So for that purpose, we will use certain database structures and supporting languages. And let's see what database in general is. You may already know these things. Database is where the data related to application is stored, and data are accessed by means of queries. And these queries are written using specific languages that are supported by the particular database. And usually a database is maintained in a centralized location. We have, for normal applications, we use a centralized database, but there are also decentralized database where the database will be splitted and distributed among different devices. And as I said, it is manipulated using CRUD operations, which are create, read, update, and delete. And usually front-end users are not given direct access to database owing to the data security. And instead, the backend application acts as a mediator who fetches data from the database and pass it on to the user based on the user's request. So there are two major types of databases available. You are already familiar with the term SQL, structured query language. So and there is another version of database called NoSQL. We'll see in detail both of them. So coming to SQL, as you know, it follows a relational database concept. That means data are arranged in tables, and these tables are somehow connected with each other. And data security and integrity are ensured by means of very strict rules in relational database, such as, you know, in SQL you use constraints and different types of keys to keep the data secure. And as you know, it is more structured, and some of the examples for SQL type database are MySQL, PostgreSQL, PLSQL, etc. And coming to the NoSQL database, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but this is actually a very popular concept of database, NoSQL. As the name suggests, it is the entire opposite of SQL. In NoSQL, data are not represented in tables. Instead, they are represented in a very famous format called JSON. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. Here again, the role of JavaScript comes in. This data are stored in the way in which in JavaScript language objects are represented. So by means of curly braces and square brackets. It's very easy to understand and very easy to learn. You can just Google it, what is JSON format. Very, very easy to understand. And the benefits of this type of database are it's more flexible. That means In the case of a relational database where you are storing data in the form of tables, if you have three columns, three attributes mentioned in the table, then for each record, you can't leave any of those attributes blank. That is not allowed in relational database. Whereas in NoSQL database, that is possible. For one record, you can have three attributes. For the next record, you can have two records. For the next record, you can have four attributes. So it's scalable and it's more flexible. You can leave some blank space. That's okay with NoSQL database. So it's much, it has lesser constraints as compared to relational database. And some of the popular NoSQL databases are MongoDB and Oracle NoSQL and CouchDB. Oracle has both SQL version as well as NoSQL version databases. And out of this, MongoDB is the most popular among developers because of its very easy to learn structure. And we'll see about MongoDB a little later, how popular it is a little later. Now, yes, I earlier mentioned that there is another component called runtime environment. What this means is, suppose you are working on a project, full stack project, and your team wrote a code for a front-end application using maybe AngularJS, and someone else from your team wrote the code for the backend using Express.js. Now, the application is not actually complete. For that to be considered as complete, we need to somehow run the code you have written somewhere. It's similar to the C program you're writing in your colleges. After you write the code, you compile it and run it in a platform. Similarly, your front-end application code needs to be compiled and executed in order for the user to interact with the system. So we need an environment where our code can be compiled and executed. So for the front-end application, if you are considering web applications, that runtime environment is your web browser itself, like Mozilla Firefox, Google Chrome, Internet Explorer, etc. And if you are considering mobile applications, then within your OS, there is a runtime environment pre-built. And now coming to the backend application, we need to set up a runtime environment by ourselves. And for that, we can use a lot of services, and one of the most popular runtime environment services is Node.js. Node.js acts both as a runtime environment where the code gets executed and also as a server where the backend application can be loaded. So Node.js is a very handy tool. If you can learn the basics of Node.js, that again is a great addition to your resume. Now we'll look at some examples of popular full stacks. So MeanStack, let's take the case of MeanStack. MeanStack used to be a very popular full stack combination back a few years back. M stands for MongoDB, in which this means that an application developed using MeanStack has MongoDB as its database, and E stands for Express.js, which means the backend application was developed using Express.js. A stands for AngularJS, that means the front-end application was developed using AngularJS, and N stands for Node.js, which means Node acts as the runtime environment for running the backend application developed using Express.js. So this MeanStack used to be a very popular framework a few years back, but after React.js was introduced to the industry, the popularity of AngularJS got reduced and React took its place, and hence there came this full stack called MeanStack, where the rest is same. M stands for Mongo, E for Express, N for Node. The only difference is the front end is now being developed using React.js. It's so popular nowadays. I will talk about it later. And one another stack is LAMP, which is a PHP based full stack. Okay, so full stack refers to the entire application that starts from front end to the backend, including the database and all runtime environments. So I think you are clear with the concept of what full stack is. Full stack means if you want to become a full stack developer, you have to work on each of these 3 modules in an application development project. Whereas if you are only comfortable with developing a front end using React or Angular, then you will be termed as a front end developer. And if you are comfortable in working on backend applications alone, then you will be termed as a backend application. In earlier days, companies used to hire separate front-end developers and separate backend developers, but the trend is now changing. Now, most companies are looking for developers who can work on all 3 modules, which means they are looking for full stack developers. If you go to any job profile sites, you can see a lot of job postings calling for full stack developers. So I would say having this skill set is like a safe zone for you, because web development or application development is a very easy task. So even if you are thinking about specializing in some other areas such as maybe machine learning or blockchain, still if you have this knowledge of full stack development, it acts like a safe zone. You can come back to it even if your other areas somehow doesn't work out. Okay. So I would suggest everyone to develop this ability of full stack development, or at least a backend or at least a front end development skill set. Okay. Now, as I promised, I will talk about React.js a bit more, because this is actually a revolution. React.js was actually first developed by some Facebook employees for their internal use, but considering its features, its benefits, Facebook decided to release React.js to the public, and from that day onwards, it's being the most popular framework for front-end development. The reasons for that, if you can learn React.js, it's a great addition to your resume, because these are the benefits for learning React.js, suitable for web app development and hybrid mobile app development, React Native. If you recall from the previous slides, that if you can learn React.js, of course you can create front-end application for web applications. Okay. But at the same time, I also mentioned that nowadays companies are looking for hybrid app developers, and React Native is one of the most popular frameworks for hybrid applications. So if you can learn React.js for web application, you can easily learn React Native as well, because there is only slight differences. Okay. So with just learning one framework, you are adding 2 skills to your resume, and 2 useful skills to your resume, which is like the most popular frameworks in the market right now. And as I said, it's immensely popular, and due to that reason, and it's also developer friendly. The reason behind that is Facebook is constantly giving updates and releasing newer versions of React by incorporating much better developer friendly features to React. If you check the differences between a newer version of React and an older version of React, you will understand that how much support Facebook has given for this particular framework. And it is so efficient in client-side rendering, because as I said, we are using React for front-end application development. So it's working in the client side or in the user side. So at the user side, the rendering of its components is much efficient with React, and it is done through a concept called virtual DOM. I'm not explaining too much about virtual DOM here. It's out of context for this webinar. Anyway, the React.js is efficient in client-side rendering due to its use of a concept called virtual DOM. And the next point I want to explain a little bit more. It is popular among single-page applications. And this term, single-page applications, is very important in the IT industry right now, because earlier we used to develop conventional websites to access through web browsers. But nowadays, most companies are moving towards something called single page applications. It is because single page application has a huge benefit. I will explain that in detail. So let's take the case of a conventional website. Okay, normal website. And I think you know that every website will have an index.html file, which will be the uh, homepage of the website. And you know, websites are collection of web pages. Each web page is represented using an HTML document. So the index.html will be the first document that will be rendered if you access a website, and then there will be multiple hyperlinks for you to navigate to other HTML documents, right? So so in a conventional website, if you try to access a website by entering the web address in the address bar, a request is made to the corresponding server, and that request is to fetch the index.html file. It's supporting CSS and JavaScript files and all the media files like images and videos included in the web page, fetches all this data into the user's web browser. So this takes a lot of resources, a lot of network usage happens here. And once all this data reaches the user side, it gets rendered and this web page is shown to you. Now, if I click a hyperlink, maybe called as contact us, what happens is another request is being made to the server to fetch the contactus.html file, its corresponding supporting files and its media files, and fetch all this data to the browser again. This again utilizes a lot of resources. So this happens each time when a web page is accessed in a website. But in contrary, coming to single page applications, we won't be maintaining different HTML documents for different pages. Instead, we'll be only maintaining a single index.html page. And during the first accessing of this website or web application, the entire content will be fetched to the user's browser. And then for each page access later, the browser will select the components that are required to render this page and render it at the user side. There is no further fetching happening. So this reduces the amount of resources used by the application. So this is why single page applications are nowadays becoming so popular. It will be very faster and it's much easier to develop as well. In single page applications, we divide the website or the web page into different smaller components. These components acts like jigsaw puzzles. And whenever we need to render a web page, we just pick the correct components and just assemble them on the web page and render it. So this is a very efficient way of accessing a web application, creating a web application, and React.js supports this kind of architecture. And it is due to this reason React is now becoming so popular. So the coming years are for single page applications. So it will be great use to you if you can master React.js. Now that concludes actually the full stack concept area. As I said, I'm not going any deep into this area. I just explained what a full stack means, what are its components, the difference between front end and back end, and the popular frameworks used to develop these front end, back end, and database modules, and talked about React.js as well, about its benefits. Now we are moving on to the second part of this webinar, where we will discuss about a highly useful tool called Firebase, provided by Google itself. So you can see an equation here, F is equal to men. Actually this equation is not entirely correct. I just added this equation here to give you an idea about how powerful is Firebase. Here you can see I mentioned that Firebase is equal to MongoDB plus Express.js plus Node.js. And if you can remember correctly, in mean stack or merge stack, we saw Mongo, Express, and Node being used in unison, right? So in a merge stack, barring that R, which means React.js, the rest of the things are MongoDB for database, Express for backend application, and Node for runtime environment. So with the use of Firebase, it is possible to replace all these three separate technologies, and we can just create an application using just React and Firebase. React is required for that front-end development, but for rest of the applications, we can use a single tool called Firebase. Let's see more detail about what Firebase is. So coming to Firebase, it is a very popular tool, developer tool provided by Google. It was launched in 2012 and is popular ever since. And Firebase has the potential to replace multiple technologies of a full stack. So you can create an entire business except the front end part.
Hello, Arjun. Hello, Arjun. Arjun. Hello, Arjun, you there?